I'm so excited to be here today talking to you guys about this series, The Power of Small. One thing that I just find myself saying a lot more and more often is I'm a dad of two now, and so I'm getting the dad figure, if you will. And one of the things that makes me think about this power of small is if you've ever looked at yourself and been like, man, I gotta work out or I gotta eat better or something. If you go talk to people who want to see you succeed, one of the things they always say is do something realistic, right? Because one of the biggest things that gets in our way is we start researching programs, and we're like, oh, I'm gonna be at the gym 7 times a week and 2 hours a day, and we get into this really grandiose thing, and then of course we never do it, right? And so they always tell you just what is something realistic. And so the cool thing about this series, The Power of Small, is we're talking about really, really realistic things for our life, and the fact that we believe in a big God who can take these baby steps that we can take and can do amazing, amazing things with them. And so I hope you guys are just locked into this series and just ready to hear about these things that can really change our lives. And so today I want to start with something really small in our lives, which is something you might call habit or routine or personality. But today I want to talk about what are those small things in our life that are the way they are because of who we are. And to me, I'm going to call it our default, right? So what's our default? Our default, the way we do things, right? And it might be based on a ton of things. There might be certain genetics you have that have just kind of made you default a certain way, right? Like how tall you are or how short you are, and those affect all the things that you do on a daily routine, right? Or your upbringing, right? The way that your home was, or the culture you grew up in, or society, right? Those shape things that are just natural. You might not even know that you do them. They're just a part of who you are. And our personality, right? Some of our choices that we make, things we like, things that we dislike, all of these go into creating kind of our default who we are. The things that we do or we don't do on a regular basis that we don't even think about, right? And let me give you some examples from my life, so maybe this can make a little bit more sense and be a little more tangible, right? Some of these things we really don't know their defaults about us until something changes in our life, and we're like, oh, I didn't even know that, right? So one thing for me, just like a very tangible physical thing, was I grew up in Oregon, up here, right? And when I was in college, I moved to Southern California, right? So we're moving into the dorms. Right, we're on the second floor, we're taking stuff from the car, it's hot out, it's August, right? We're just going up and down, and we finished our move, right? And so at this point, I'm like, man, I'm tired. We've been moving a lot of stuff, and I just feel thirsty. And so what is my default thing I do when I'm thirsty? Well, I go and grab a cup. I brought some plastic cups, and I go to the faucet in the bathroom, right? And I turn on the water, and let me tell you guys, if you've never lived in Southern California, there's not many disgusting things as tasting water from a faucet in Southern California, okay? But that was my default, right? I grew up here. When I had to get water, it was I didn't even think about it. I just went to the faucet and filled it up. But these things, they shape the way that we live our lives, right? Sometimes it's things that we don't do. I've never really been a breakfast eater. I didn't eat breakfast today. Some of you are like, I couldn't make it that long. Some of you might feel just like me. But I didn't choose that or not choose that. It's just part of me. I have no idea. We had breakfast when I was growing up. It wasn't that it wasn't there. Just part of who I am, my default. It's not just physical things. Sometimes it's part of our emotional makeup. I've always been an includer. I'm a youth pastor, so when we play games, there's just something in me about that kid who's standing by himself that just doesn't sit right? There's just something about me that's like, everyone needs to be involved in this. I don't know why exactly that is, but it's just part of who I am. It's my default nature. And lastly, I'm just really skeptical. It's just a part of who I am. I always joke about my mom because she'll tell stories from when I was a kid, and obviously she was conscious and I really wasn't. And I'll be like, I don't know if I believe you, right? It's just part of who I am. I don't know why, but it just is. And the truth is, we all have these different things in our life, these defaults. And some of them we like, and they're good for us. And some of them we don't like, and they're bad for us. And the thing that's challenging about the ones that we don't like is they're really hard to change, right? They're really hard to overcome these defaults in our life that we don't like. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a story in the New Testament, a story about Jesus and his disciples. And I think when we look at this story, we're going to realize that there's a default nature about human beings, that we all fall into this category. And it's going to kind of come out in this story. And then Jesus is going to actually teach about this. And then I think we're going to be amazed at how Jesus' words actually offer something really transformational for our lives, all right? And so if you want to follow along, you can take out your Bible or power it up, or you can follow along on the screen. And we're going to start in Matthew chapter 17 in verse 9, all right? So if you want to follow along, it's Matthew chapter 17, verse 9. Let me set the stage for you. Right before this, Jesus has taken a couple of his closest disciples, and he's taken them up to a mountain, and he's given them the spiritual showing of a lifetime. They got to meet these like fathers of the faith and see stuff that you would be like, this is unbelievable, this is impossible, this could never happen. He takes them into this amazing, amazing moment, and then this is what happens. It says, verse 9, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, don't tell anyone about the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. So the disciples asked him, why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Elijah is coming and will restore everything, he replied, but I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him. On the contrary, they did what pleased to him. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. And then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist. When they reached a crowd, a man approached and knelt before him. Lord, he said, have mercy on my son, because he has seizures and he suffers terribly. He often falls into fire and often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him. And Jesus replied, you unbelieving and perverse generation, how long will I be with you? Bring him here to me. And then Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him. And from that moment, the boy was healed. Then the disciples approached Jesus privately, and they said, why couldn't we drive it out? Because of your little faith, he told them. Now, in defense of this series, when Jesus says because of your little faith, he's really talking about no faith, right? Some translations say because of your unbelief. So today we're talking about the power of little faith. Jesus is really referring to them as no faith, because you have no faith. Right? What I want you to understand about the story is that this isn't Matthew chapter 1. Right? This isn't the disciples' first day on the job. It's not like they've never seen Jesus do anything miraculous, or that they haven't been hanging around him a long time. In fact, some of them just had the experience of a lifetime. Yet right after that, they come to this moment, and they can't do this thing that Jesus has entrusted them to do. And they're like, why couldn't we do this? And he's like, because you guys have no faith. And so this is what I want to argue with you guys today. This is what I want to argue for you to understand, is that faith is not our default. Faith as humans, it's not our default. If it was, then the disciples would have had it, right? Because out of all the people who should have been ready, they should have been ready. But even they weren't. Faith, right, it's essentially believing that someone's going to do what they say they're going to do, or something's going to happen the way that it should, or that we've been taught it should happen, right? This is kind of the essence of faith. And it's just not in our nature. It's not our default. And let me argue for it. Let me give you guys a couple of examples. Number one, I think we kind of learn that just in survival, right? Like, we are so lucky, guys, right? We get to live in awesome homes, and we have like access to showers and cars and all these sort of things, right? And there were people who came way before us, right, who had to live a lot closer to dangerous animals, right? We don't have to live that close. Maybe some of you, if you live a little farther out. But we had people who had to live in those situations. And you guys have heard this saying before, right? It's quiet. It's a little too quiet, right? You guys know what I'm talking about, this saying, right? Where does this come from? Where does this come from? It just takes me to those instances of survival, right, where you're like, the world is telling me everything's perfect right now, right? The world is telling me that this is a peaceful moment, yet something in our gut, right, in this surrounding, we're like, it's too quiet. We got to be on the defense, right? And so it's this idea of like, we don't trust that peace is actually there. We have this just lack of faith that everything's going to work out in these still moments, right? We have this saying, but it's more than that, right? Faith in others. right? We really struggle with faith in others. And I know this in my own life because when I'm driving behind people and they flip on their right blinker, I'm like, all right, I'll believe it when I see it, right? I'll believe it when I see it. I drive that way. Like, I know you're telling me one thing, but we'll see. And sometimes it's kind of a control issue, right? We have a hard time sometimes putting our faith in other people. And one of the greatest indicators to me that faith is not our default is who should we have faith in the most, right? Who should we have faith in the most? Ourselves, right? Because we're in control. So if we're like for sure going to have faith in someone, it should be us. But if we're honest, when we have those silent moments, when we have those reflective moments, sometimes we even ask those questions, can I even do this thing? Do I even have value? Am I even making a difference? Right? The person who like most tangibly we should be able to be like, I can have faith in myself. Sometimes we even question that. Faith is just, it's not our default. And I think the disciples learned that lesson as they were following Jesus, that it's a hard thing to do and that it wasn't always their natural thing. So interestingly enough, Jesus doesn't just leave it there, right? As often, he doesn't just leave things. He uses it as a moment to teach, right? And so right after he tells the disciples that they don't have a faith, or a good enough faith, this is what he says. He says, "For truly I tell you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will tell this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." I think the key of what Jesus is trying to tell us in this statement is that little or small faith is big faith. That's what we have to understand, is that small faith is big faith, right? God measures differently. In this whole series, we're looking at how God measures differently. And what to us seems like small faith is actually big faith to him. And we have to ask why, right? So first, let's ask, why is faith small, right? I think faith is small because we see it from a human perspective, right? Moments of small faith where we finally step out and do something we feel like God's asking us to do. We know from our perspective that decision is based out of doubt and indecision and fear, and we go back and forth, and maybe God wanted us to do something and it took us a year to do it, or 5 years to do it, or 20 years to do it, and we're just coming back around to it. Often to us, faith is small because we feel like we're making the decisions we make out of weakness, or like out of what's left, or I just kind of accidentally stumbled across it. For me, this was my college experience. When I was in high school, I decided that I wanted to go in ministry kind of towards the end, and I had a relationship with a guy who worked at a university, and so I applied to this university. It was a really exclusive university. They had only a certain amount of people they let in every year, and I really felt like God's called me to ministry. This is what I'm doing. I'm doing the right thing, right? I was all in. I was excited. And then in January, I got that letter, right? You get excited, and I got this thing, and I'm like, oh, this is just going to be me, just going on my journey with God. And then I open this letter, and it's like, you didn't make our first round. We have one more round, so, wait and see if you get in. And I was like, oh, I don't have a plan B for this whole future college situation, right? And it really hit me in that moment. I really thought I was going where I was supposed to go. I was doing what I was supposed to do. And the truth is, if I'm being honest, I kind of was like, man, God, did I do something wrong, right? Do I not have enough faith? Did I not believe in you? Like, it was just a very, very confusing moment for me. And so after that, I kind of freaked out, and I didn't know what to do, and I had a friend actually who was going on a college visit, and I was like, I better figure something out, so I went with him. I kind of liked the college. I applied, I got in, and I ended up going to a different school. I didn't end up going to that school, and that school changed my life. That school molded me and changed me, and I have relationships that changed my life there, and but that didn't seem like a big deal choosing to go there, right? It seemed like accidental, and after I'd already failed, at least that's what it felt like to me, right? Because when we see faith from our side, it just seems small. It just seems like it was an accident, like I had so much doubt and fear and indecision, but that's what happened, right? And that's how we see it. But the truth is that Jesus and God, they see faith as big. That's why they give us this whole mustard seed and moving mountains. Because if you have a little, God says, if you just have a little faith, I can do big things with that, because we serve a big God who is powerful. And Jesus understood that. And in this message to his disciples, he wanted them to understand that same truth as well. that if we just have a small amount of faith, we can move mountains. The impossible can be done. So if we believe this teaching of Jesus, and if we acknowledge that our small faith can actually be big when we put it in the hands of God, we will have the ability to see our own lives change. Because here's the truth, guys. If we have faith, even small faith, the result of that is hope. The result of faith is hope. And when we have hope, that has the ability to change our lives, to change our actions, to change where we're at, all right? If you have ever read the book of Hebrews, it is a book in the New Testament. It is written after the time of Jesus. It is written to some people kind of urging them to believe again, to have faith again, to be the people of God once again. And they have this beautiful, beautiful verse on faith that goes like this. It says, "Now faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen." And we're always like, oh, that sounds so good. No idea what that means, right? At least that's how I feel when we first hear that verse, right? But let me give you a little context. So we're going to pick up a little bit before that in chapter 10. This is what it says. Excuse me. "Remember the earlier days when after you had been enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to taunts and afflictions, and at other times you were companions of those who were treated that way. For you sympathized with prisoners and accepted with joy the confiscation of your possessions, because you know that you yourselves have a better and enduring possession. So don't throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, for you need endurance, so that after you have done God's will, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while, the coming one will come and not delay, but my righteous one will live by faith. And if he draws back, I have no pleasure in him, but we are not those who draw back and are destroyed, but those who have faith and are saved." Now, faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. The reason I love this section is because today we're talking about faith, and we're talking about why we should have faith. And sometimes we just say the word faith a bunch of times, and if you're like me, you're like, what does that mean? I know it sounds good, I know it's a church thing, but what does faith actually look like? Like, what does it actually mean? The book of Hebrews gives us this wonderful understanding that faith is the reality of what's hoped for. That means what faith is believing that what God said he would do, what God's promise is, that he'll bring his people back together, that he will restore our earth, that he will restore the brokenness that we see, that he will come back. Faith is the reality of what that thing is. Faith, that means faith is living today, like that future promise is your reality today. That's what faith is. And so what that means is that when we have faith, when we truly have faith that leads to this kind of hope, we can act differently. Right? Because I think what we do most of the time is we think of faith differently. We think of faith more as like the small things that we pray for, that we seek, that we try and follow God in our everyday lives, right? That's how we see faith the most of the time. And so what we end up doing is we end up judging how faithful we are on how successful the outcomes of our endeavors are, right? So for instance, if we want to help someone and we feel like God has asked us to step out of our way and help like this person we don't know, or someone in a ministry we don't know, or go on a missions trip, or reach out to our neighbors, one of these things, and we feel like we're acting out on faith and it doesn't go right, we feel like, well, then I failed. I didn't have enough faith, right? No. Faith is the reality of things that are hoped for, right? So when we act on faith and we fail, we can say, no, my reality is still on what's hoped for. It's not a failure. It's learning what God's calling you to do. It's not based on the success, right? Or if we're maybe thinking of a career change, right? We're like, God, I really want to be the person you want me to be. I really want to do what you want me to do. And I'm stepping out and I'm going to somewhere new, and maybe it doesn't work out the way we thought it would. Or maybe we feel like we failed, or maybe we even made a mistake and we feel like, I failed. I didn't have enough faith. I'm no good anymore. No, faith is the reality of things hoped for, right? So in these little moments of faith, we can keep trying, we can keep trusting God, we can keep getting better because our ultimate faith is the reality of what's hoped for. Maybe sometimes somebody we know gets sick, and we're pulling for him to pull through, right? And we're thinking, God, I'm praying, I'm having faith, please help this person. And when they don't pull through, we feel like, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? How did I not have a faith? enough faith. No, faith is the reality of things that we hope for. So in those moments when you feel like you're actually failing, real faith is in the end game. Real faith changes the way you act in those situations. It doesn't take away hurt, frustration. Those things still exist. But it changes who we are because we have a bigger picture. Ultimately, this is what changes. Faith is ultimately then based on God's success, not ours. Right? When it's based on our success, we feel like really lousy people because nothing's ever going our way sometimes. But when we base it on God's success, then faith is the reality of things hoped for, that God will make all things new again. That is what our faith is. And so the bottom line is that there's power in small faith. That even those little moments when we have doubt and we have fear and we have indecision, God can use those for big things because we have a big God. We have a powerful God. And so moments to us that seem like really insignificant, He can use for the better. And so here's a couple thoughts for life change for you guys, because at Mountainview, here's the thing. We want to be about people who are in the business of affecting life change. And not that we do it, but we believe God does it. And so every time we do something, every time we have a ministry, every time we preach, we want to encourage the power that God has to change lives. And so here's a couple of thoughts for that, all right? The first one is talk about the tension, all right? Here's what I mean about talk about the tension. My first church job, I was at the small church in Southern California, and I had to lead hymns like all the time. And so I was learning how to lead these hymns, and some of them I knew, and some of them I didn't. And some of them I really grew to love. There were songs that I hadn't heard a bunch or that I never really knew the words to. And there's a song called Great is Thy Faithfulness. Maybe you've heard it. Maybe you've gone to a church that sings it. And in the third verse, they have this section that says, pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. And I'm not going to finish it. Sorry for people who are that way. But my brain's weird. So like as we're singing songs over and over, I get lost in the moment. And I always think like, how is this constructed? Who is writing this, right? I have a weird brain. This is how I'm thinking, right? And so I'm thinking of this verse, beautiful words, like who are writing these? And as I thought like, oh, I need a pardon for my sin. And I need peace. And I need bright hope for tomorrow, and I need strength for today. I was like, why do we sing about these things? Why do we sing that we need these things? I was like, oh, because sometimes we're in despair, right? Sometimes we're like, man, everything is falling apart, and nothing's going to work out, and I don't know if I'm having faith right now in what God's saying I'm supposed to do with my life, and the world feels like it's crashing down on me. That's why these words are so beautiful, because so often that's how we feel. We're like, I need this peace. I need this strength for today. I need this hope for tomorrow. We have to talk about this tension. We have to talk about how faith isn't always our default, because what happens is that someone who sits in the back over here, they come to church and they're like, wow, I really feel like I'm not doing anything right in my life and I don't have faith. And they just assume, oh, well, I guess everybody else does, so I shouldn't talk about this. And then we just alienate ourselves and we feel bad and we have no progress, when the truth is so many of us are probably in the same boat. We have to talk about this tension, how we struggle to have faith, how sometimes we're not sure why what's going in our lives is happening that way. And here's the great thing is, first of all, you can talk about it with God. And if you don't believe me, there's this book called the Psalms. If you're not familiar with the Bible and you're just like, I want to learn about how to talk about the tension, go read this book called Psalms, because there's people in there who at some point feel like they have no faith in God at all. But in these dark moments, you can see these moments of small faith, these moments of little light that keep them through the hard times. It's a great place to start. The other thing is we have to talk about the tension in community, right? We got to learn how to get around each other and share these moments, right? Because we can feel like we're going crazy when we feel like we're the only one in this boat, right? But if we can talk about it together, we can encourage one another. We can share our wins. We can move forward. And so we got to talk about it to God. We got to talk about it to each other. The second thing is we got to act on faith. This is a shift that I hope we can take today, is see any faith as a strength and not a weakness. See, sometimes we assume off the default that we are very faithful people. And so every time that we're failing, we're thinking, I'm such a failure. This is such a weak area of my life, right? But I want to suggest that if we operate off the idea that faith is not our default, then every moment of faith is a win. Every small moment, every time we step out and we act on something that we feel like God is doing in our life, it's powerful because we have a big God and he can do big things with just a little bit of faith. See any faith as strength and not weakness. And here's the reality of that. Just because something is not our default, it doesn't mean that it's not in us. It doesn't mean that we're not capable of it, right? And we have examples of this in our life all over the place, right? We have exercise. Who wants to exercise? Like 3 of you crazy people out here maybe, right? Who wants to wake up early in the morning? Who wants discipline? Some of you, I know you're like, you want it, but anyway, it's hard, right? But just because that's not in our nature, just because that's not our default, it doesn't mean it's not in us, right? It doesn't mean that we can't obtain it. It doesn't mean that it's not beneficial for us, right? Some of you have been through school or you're in school, right? Who wants to do homework? Some of you may be crazy, but who wants to do homework, right? But there's these things about discipline and trying things that are good for us, even if it's not in our nature, right? Work. Some of us love our job. Some of us hate our job. Most of us are probably in between. It depends on the day. Work, it may not be something that's in our default. I want to go to work every day, right? But we know what comes from it. We know the good role that it plays in our life, right? Just because it might not be our default, it doesn't mean it's not in us. And the last thing I put for this is parenting, right? Some of it's instinctual, but some of it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing, right? I have 2 young kids. I have no idea what I'm doing. It's trial and error, right? Some of it is just like, I don't know how to put this small human being before myself. I don't know how to be selfless in that way, but you just learn, right? You just kind of jump in the deep end. Just because things aren't natural, it doesn't mean that they're not good for us. It doesn't mean that they're not in us. But we have to act, right? Act on faith. And the last thing is repeat, all right? I want to share with you guys one more thing from our story today. So right after this teaching happens, life goes on, right? So Jesus finds himself with the disciples right after this teaching happens, and here's what happens. It says, as they were gathering together in Galilee, this is literally right after what we just read, Jesus told them, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the 3rd day he will be raised up. And the disciples had great faith. No, they did not. And the disciples were deeply distressed, right? And so it's like they go up on the mountain, have this great experience, they come down, they lack faith. Jesus literally says, here's what you should believe, here's how you should have faith. Then he tells them, by the way, I'm going to be killed and rise. And they're like, oh, this is terrible. They're greatly distressed. That's why I think faith is not our default, right? Because we ride this roller coaster. We feel like we really pulled through for God, and then the next week we're like, wow, I'm falling short again. So we got to repeat. We got to do this over and over. Faith is a lifelong journey, and it takes lots of practice. It takes lots of getting better at, and we have to keep talking about it with God and with people and acting every time God calls us out to. And here's the thing, here's why we can do this. Here's why it's achievable. Because our faithfulness does not necessarily correlate to our success, right? Because when we have faith in the small moments, when we have faith stepping out on what God's calling us to do, we can remember that faith is ultimately what? Faith is the reality of things hoped for. Ultimate faith is that we believe that what God said he will do is our reality right now. And if we truly believe in that, then all the little things along the way, we can just keep figuring out. The ushers are going to come forward as we get ready for a time in communion. One of the beautiful things about our God is that he is a forgiving God. He is a merciful God. He is a God full of grace. And that's why we have such an ability to figure out things like faith, right? It's because God is willing to forgive us that we can actually take on really difficult things like this, and we can fail and we can get up over and over again. If you've never taken communion with us at Mountainview, we pass trays and we have a little cup of juice and a little piece of bread, and you can kind of take it, and we kind of take it in our own time. And communion is a thing we do because Jesus did it with his disciples. And it's a thing he did to represent this new covenant, his body broken, his blood poured out, that we might have new life in his name. When we take communion, we look at what God did in the past, we celebrate what he's doing in the future, and we anticipate in faith the reality of things that are hoped for, that are coming, that God will restore all things again. And so my hope for us today as we take communion is that even though we usually kind of take it by ourselves, that we will think of our community. Because the truth is that faith is less daunting and faith is better when we're together. And so as we take communion today and we think of what Jesus did for us, the hope that he gave us, that we can actually have faith in God because of what Jesus did, let's be reminded that he did it for all of us and that we can step out in faith because we're doing it all together. Will you guys pray with me? God, thank you for who you are and for your grace and for your forgiveness, because we are just trying to figure this thing out. And sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. But we're so gracious that you loved us enough to give us yourself on a cross so that our sins could be forgiven, so that we could have new life, and so that we could actually pursue being faithful people. I just pray that you will give us hearts of faith, that you will lay those moments on our heart, and that we won't base our faith on success, on things turning out the way that we want them to turn out, but we'll base our faith on, are we living like people whose reality now reflects our future hope? Help us work on our minds, work on our hearts. Help us this week to be like Jesus. We pray these things in your name. Amen.